have been requested to react to a video about a Brit moving to contemporary Russia. As you know, this is happening in a new way since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And the new way is that a move to Russia for a lot of people, and I don't know if the video we're going to watch together is going to be an example of that, but the move to Russia for a lot of people has become not a move to Russia, but a move within Western culture wars. So the idea is normally made up of two elements. A Brit, an American, somebody from the continental European countries decides to move to Russia to get away from a decaying West and then to document their journey on YouTube. And so there's a kind of inherent contradiction there already, because you're getting away from a kind of desacralized, consumerist calamity that's the West, and you're gonna monetize your documentation of it on YouTube. Now, I have no idea if the video we're about to watch falls into this bracket, because we're going to be just honestly watching it and reacting. But before I take you there, let's ground ourselves a little bit about Russia, about what it would be like if you moved there, right? Because I mean, all of you are thinking of moving to Russia immediately, as far as I can tell. So you need this advice. Russia is comparatively not a very conservative country, contrary to Russian propaganda. And what happens to a lot of Westerners like Jordan Peterson, who we're not criticizing now because he's been profoundly sick for several months, but for people like Jordan Peterson, Russia has semi-successfully presented itself as a kind of oasis of conservative values. Well, that's political technology from the Kremlin. It's not real. Russia is less conservative than most Western countries on many significant dimensions. Let me just give you one. The religious people in Russia are more secular than the religious people in the West. In fact, that's probably one of the top 10 most striking features of Russian culture, the almost non-religious nature of the religious people there. Now, of course, I'm making a generalization, and there are going to be people on an adequate, proper, meaningful journey of exploration of God. But there are a lot of people who are religious in the sense that they go to church twice a year, and they're very impressed with themselves, and they don't have a single other thought about the cosmos, about a purpose to life that might somehow be transcendent in between their attendances. So what's spectacularly striking about the secularism of Russia is how secular the religious people there are. Now, the religious people in the modern world tendentiously are, as the wonderful Charles Taylor showed in a 2004 wonderful tour de force book called The Secular Age. It's a feature of modernity that in it religious people are much more secular than before, but it's a very special feature of Russia. And I even go further. There is something consumerist actually about the way people interact with religion, which leads me to the second important feature of Russian culture that I want to mention. And that's neoliberalism and consumerism. Russia is a spectacularly consumerist country, The United States is more consumerist than Europe by far. Russia is more consumerist than the United States. And in fact, one of the reasons the West is still so popular in Russia relative to what you might expect given Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the propaganda machine is that there are a lot of interesting consumer goods in the West, like Mercedes and BMWs. Now, do we want to mention another feature of Russian culture? Yeah, let's do one more. Russian men have a very strong intolerance of their feminine side. And that, unfortunately, produces a situation where women aren't heard, and very often women don't want to hear themselves. One of the interesting ways in which Russian women avoid feminism is, funnily enough, through consumerism. There are a lot of things that are attractive to Russian women that are consumerist attractions, which persuade them into particular roles, various roles in which they are objectified. There's this very interesting interaction of women not reflectively engaging with their own rights because of a kind of consumerist avoidance of that. So you are pushed to be the sort of thing that men want you to be, the sort of thing that men want to look at, via an urge to obtain the kind of consumerist objects that make you fulfill that role properly. So that's, of course, ubiquitous, but there's an extreme of that. That's one other way in which Russia is an extreme rather than a unique proposition in the features of its culture. Now, let's say something a bit more critical. Let's say something positive and something negative. Let's say one negative and one positive thing about Russian culture. Let's say a negative thing. The negative thing that I'd probably mention first, if I had to name only one, would be unboundariness. It's expressed politically, of course, as you can see, but it's also expressed interpersonally. And sometimes you might hear the argument that this is a matter of cultural difference, such that it feels like unboundariness to us, but it's not unboundariness to Russians. Bullshit. Russians are unboundaried in a way that irritates the bejesus out of Russians. Now, it would irritate the bejesus out of us more, but it irritates the bejesus out of Russians. So it's a kind of transgressive non-precautious, intrusive attitude to the space and feelings and presentation of others. Let's try to name a positive thing. I think a positive thing, funnily enough, is a kind of reckless loyalty toward people who are in. And that means that, connecting this point with the previous point about consumerism and neoliberalism, that means that Russia is a culture that's neoliberal in a familial way. It's not one individual against another individual only. It's one individual plus their family plus their network against the entire world, to the point that the rest of the world doesn't even exist. So it's not just me out to get everybody. It's me and my circle out there against the world. And the claims and the needs of the world are just obstacles, making certain exaggerations here, of course, to convey, tendentious features of a culture. All features of a culture are tendentious. In any culture that's strongly inclined toward A, you will often find remarkable examples of not A. So obviously all of that is taken for granted. But if you're in, you're in. And if you're not in, it's almost as though you might as well not exist, right? And there are millions of Russians who find that repellent and don't share it, but there aren't tens of millions of Russians who find it repellent and don't share it. So that's a little bit of an introduction. Let's begin watchificating ourselves. Oh, I need to record this, don't I? My apologies. Let's rock and roll with the recording. There we go. Let's start.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Russia, specifically the city of Kursk, my home city. Now, there are many people...
Now, don't you just want to move to Kursk right now? I bet you do. I bet you've got your flights, haven't you, already? I know it.
Who want to move here to Russia, many adventurous people, and also many people that think it's a nightmare here, like you really shouldn't, you'd be stupid to do so. I'll also take you on my average Saturday afternoon.
Average Saturday afternoon, okay. We're not going to watch the whole thing, but we'll just scroll around and react.
Did I make a mistake? Let's go.
Okay. And so who is this? This is
I thought
Ben
I would discuss the
Brit.
positive sides first. So I'm taking you to one of the most beautiful areas of the city. It's quite a large park right in the centre. Let's go and have a look. So if you've already decided that you want to come to Russia, then the main positive is a recent decree, well, it was about a year ago, presidential decree creating a simplified process for those who hold traditional Russian values. So if you hold those traditional values, the process is simplified. Great. Basically it means that you can come here and get a residency permit without needing knowledge of the Russian language, which was quite a big hurdle for many people to come over. One thing I would say is, 100%, even if you want to choose this decree, do learn the Russian language.
So,
because you cannot survive
one of
here
the reasons
and live in
this was shown to me to react to is that apparently he's going to say negative things about his experience in Russia. So let's see how he goes.
Life here if you don't know Russian. At least learn the basics. Try to pick up a little bit. May not be a requirement on paper, but you definitely need to do so. Another benefit, I would say, compared to most Western countries, would be the safety. Most of the time, even in areas which would feel sketchy.
Yeah, depends on your expectations. But yeah, I mean, plenty of bits of Russia might be, on the whole, safer, might feel safer than whatever it might mean, equivalent bits of the United States.
Perhaps compared to others, it's actually relatively safe. Much safer than my experiences in England or France or America. Obviously it's not a wonderland, it's not free from crime, but you definitely do feel the difference in safety.
I'm not feeling good about saying it's safer than European countries.
I did recently make a video where I walked around at night trying to see if this truly was the case. And it turned out, yeah, I was completely fine. This place just a few weeks ago was absolutely crowded full of people. It's midday on a Saturday, so it is kind of strange that it's so empty. But yes, the weather isn't exactly ideal.
Okay.
In summer, there's just...
Hello, cat.
If you want this kind of wilderness experience, you go to Siberia, go to Altai.
Okay, so this is the Russia is big and Russia has everything to offer, okay.
Relatively.
So where's he there?
It's absolutely stunning. For, like, bicycles being pulled up here? Or are they for wheelchairs? Because if they're for wheelchairs, then that's pretty damn steep. Maybe I'll go down one of them in the wheelchair for a video.
Soviet Union accommodated disabled people well on paper, but it wasn't the case in practice, and in many ways it's an absolute nightmare to be disabled in Russia, even in Moscow.
See if I end up dying. They're always that steep. It's just crazy to me. I really hope it's not for wheelchairs, but we'll find out, I guess. Tell me in the comments if you know.
In the West, especially since 2020, we have excelled at just forgetting about a part of the population, a percentage point of the population that's disabled, usually through some kind of post-viral illness like myalgic encephalomyelitis and more recently long COVID. But broadening this out to other challenges people have, Russia has a 10x greater capacity than we do in the West to simply say a part of our population doesn't count. Of course, you're seeing that with the contract soldiers too. And the way that works is through a kind of extraordinary neoliberal transactionism. That's to say that if you sign the contract, your villagers are not going to, fellow villagers, fellow, inhabitants in your building, in your urban area, wherever you live, they're not going to feel, oh no, the state sent this person in a bad way to a bad place to do bad things. They're going to feel, well, this person made a deal with the political authority that happens to have power over a territory. And the deal is between them and that authority. It had some benefits, it had some risks. The risks is what materialized. But look, what has that got to do with me, though? There is a desolidarization of oneself from that person as a fellow member of society. And there is a kind of civic detachment of oneself from one's political authority. The Kremlin is a sort of colonial power that happens to control this territory, and people living on this territory can make business deals with it.
Now, most of these you can just enjoy as a tourist here. But one positive, which I'd say would be a big thing for moving here, would be the quality of life. Now, even in a provincial city like here in Kursk, the quality of life is much higher than you would expect for the amount of money, even when considering wages. The public transport is very nice, very efficient, very cheap. You've got these nice parks here, like I've mentioned. You always have cafes, and the prices are pretty reasonable, once again, even when you take into consideration the lower salaries here. Overall, it's quite a nice place to live. You don't have big problems with crime. I'd say, even though it's difficult to get in, because it is difficult, and I will talk about the difficulties later, it is still definitely worth it, because things that are worth it are going to be difficult. Another positive...
So if you think of yourself as being sort of stuck somewhere in northern England with poor infrastructure, poor transport, and Russia has awful transport issues too, but on many counts of the convenience of infrastructure, you could be pleasantly surprised. And obviously, if you're in the really big urban centers in Moscow and Petersburg, you're going to be very, very pleasantly surprised relative to actually a lot of places in the West.
Which beats many of the stereotypes, would be that Russians are actually incredibly friendly. Здравствуйте.
Да.
Ваш английский очень хорошо.
Да. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What has he got to
They
tell
have
us?
quite a hard and cold shell, but once you actually break through it, they become some of the best people you will ever meet. Some of the friendliest, most helpful, most loyal. And
it depends on where you are. I don't think big urban centers are a warm place in Russia. Somewhere deep in the countryside, that might be the case. Russians are incredibly externalizing of foreigners in particular. So that might be via a kind of application of a prejudice of racial inferiority. If you don't come from the West. If you come from the West, you're still going to be elevated in Russia today. You might be surprised because, of course, that unbelievable bubble that appeared in Russia in the 80s and lasted a little into the early 90s, which was a conception of the West as utopia, that bubble long burst. And what burst in the 90s in Russia is the notion that Western politics and Western economics was utopia. But I think what has begun to happen more recently is that folks in Russia have begun to turn against not just Western governments as they did during the Cold War, but Western culture and Western citizens. But when I say they've begun to turn against us, that's all I mean. In other words, as a whole, if all you watch is sort of Putin's propaganda, you're going to be astounded by how positively disposed Russians are going to be to Westerners, even though they're much less positively disposed than they used to be, and how they're actually going to elevate Westerners. They're still going to think that there's something about Westerners that's a bit more progressive or a bit more superior. And often there'll be a lot of magical thinking involved in this. It won't be that they'll accurately perceive the ways at which things are better in the West, or the ways in which things sit better in the minds of Westerners, or the relatively lesser degree of trauma that Westerners have. They're not going to perceive that accurately on the whole, but they'll somehow, via magical thinking, end up elevating Westerners, despite all of the propaganda, that Westerners are what Russians would be if Russians were less screwed up. I mean, that's going to be, in many ways, a default perception. Less of a default perception than ever before, but the starting place was so sort of unbelievably, enthrallingly pro-Western in the 80s and early 90s that the bad slide in the other direction is still nowhere near leaving the population with predominantly negative sentiments about Westerners. They're getting more negative. They're more negative than ever, but they're still preponderantly positive, especially if they're dealing with a Westerner who chooses to come to Russia.
You can even go to people in the street and talk to them, and majority of them will be very open, very friendly.
Okay, so he's gone shopping. We don't want to watch that. He's showing us some prices. He's met somebody. Well, who is this person? Let's have a look.
Ясненько. Вы англичанин?
Да, можно спросить. Что вы думаете о жизни в России, о безопасности, о
See what she thinks about life in Russia.
Погода, это природа не от нас зависит. А думаем, мы очень любим Путина. Очень. Умница, хороший человек. прекрасный. Дай Бог ему здоровья. И он все хочет для России.
You can see it feels fake what she's saying.
А все остальные говно. Знаете
We
такое
love
слово?
Putin and all the rest is shit. Interesting, he walked into that. So she doesn't need to say that. She shouldn't be criticizing Putin on camera. That could potentially endanger her. But she doesn't need to say that Putin is great. What is going on there? In other words, she's back in her apartment an hour later. What would she be thinking? Would she just be saying, yeah, I said what I thought? No, definitely not. I'm sorry, definitely not. But it wouldn't be that she's going to say that she's anti-Putin behind closed doors. Typically, it could go two ways. One way would be, let's say she's getting a visit from her son and tells him about this encounter she had. And he challenges her. He says, well, why did you start talking about Putin and why did you say this sort of vehement, positive stuff about him and then express aggression at everything else that's not pro-Putin? And she might, I think in that case, she'd either go towards saying, that's what I do. What the hell do you want me to say? I mean, he kind of is some of that. So what the hell do you want me to say? That would be sort of one way. You see, there's no politics there. She's not liking in particular any of Putin's policies. And she doesn't actually mean what she just said. But she is still aggressively committed to it as a kind of a prop to wheel out. So you see what I'm demonstrating now. I'm showing you that she didn't just say, I love Putin because she's fearful or because she lives in a tyranny. That's true. But that would only lead her to avoid saying negative things about Putin. It wouldn't lead her to say positive things about Putin. Now, there is also a kind of generalized prejudice in the Russian population, whereby people of the older generation especially think when they encounter any kind of interview-based interaction, whether it be a poll, whether it be some vox pop, they think that they're somehow communicating with their own government. And therefore they have to say that they love their government. And if they have any complaints, they need to say that they love their government and then add their complaint so that it might be heard because it was preceded with the point that they love their government. Now that's something that operates at a level of magical thinking and could actually play a role in how this woman is reacting there. But fundamentally, I think her reaction to her son at home would go in two directions. The first direction is a kind of aggressive, recalcitrant defense of the notion of wheeling out what she just wheeled out as a prop. А что ты хочешь, чтобы я сказала? What do you want me to say? That'd be one way it'll go. And the other way it would go would be actually toward a kind of almost undifferentiated hysterical aggression that transcends the topic and transcends not just Putin, but transcends politics. So, if the son questioned her, she might just lose it and just start abusing her son. Not in the most hideous way, but certainly in an unlovely way. And the point of that would be a kind of traumatized narcissism, that it would just be a way of bringing attention onto herself beyond politics, beyond anything else. It would be some kind of sort of hysterical reparative gesture. And it might go something like this. The son would say, why did you say this? And she might say, you know, what are you shoving your nose into? This is none of your business. You know, shut up. You scum. Don't you see that life is hard for me? Unfortunately, this would not be statistically atypical for someone in that demographic to react like that. Utter hysteria for us in the West, we wouldn't react like that literally unless somebody dropped a refrigerator on our motor vehicle while we were inside it, right? But Russians much more than us are capable of going there and are capable of coming out. Because if you ever got yourself, and you're Swedish, let's say, you ever got yourself into a state of frenzy of that kind, Мразь, зачем ты это мне сказал? Ты же не видишь, right? It would take you 4 hours to recover. A Russian can recover from that in 12 minutes. And then suddenly begin saying, oh, I didn't know that chamomile tea could be that fresh. That brand is better. Yeah. We couldn't do that for 4 hours if we were in that kind of hysterical state. They could.
Я могу вам все рассказать, если хотите. Я тут родилась, у меня возраст уже преклонный, мне 73 года.
I think she's probably going to go back to the West, so let's skip her. On he goes.
In America, but many places in America I would consider more conservative than Russia. Most of that comes down to some main values that many conservative people wishing to move here hold. Well, the main ones would be abortion. And that would be because, quite frankly, abortion is pretty widespread here in Russia and has been for decades. It's kind of accepted now, and it'd be very difficult to find someone who doesn't believe in it so much. The view on it is nowhere near as strict as it would be in America, or even, quite frankly, in somewhere like Britain, where it is pretty openly accepted, but here it's on another level. I'm sorry to tell you that. Another aspect
He's
of
right
that would
about
be
that. So there are less social constraints on abortion. Might be legal constraints. There's less social constraints on it, cultural constraints, than in most West European countries.
The divorce rate in Russia is extremely high, and particularly in somewhere like Moscow. Divorce is easy.
Yeah, and the normalization of affairs in Russia is extraordinary, to the point that in many circles it wouldn't cross people's minds to question somebody's decency if they're discovering they're having an affair. It'd be more like, oh, wow. So what is his affair history then? Oh, well, he did his secretary, and then the secretary's daughter, 10 years ago, and then the person across the street from there. Ah, very interesting. We wouldn't quite be able to relate like that. Now, in some countries, we have more affairs than in others. And there's a degree of normalization of this, that you're going to find in some West European countries, in France, for instance. But it's not going to match. It's not quite going to match Russia. There's going to be a breakdown of this by different demographics. I won't get into that, but tendentiously that there's an unhealthy normalization of affairs.
Single parent families, single mother families, and let's be realistic, you see them a lot, and it's genuinely accepted here. And a lot of the people who come here for the traditional values believe that that's what's rotting the West.
This guy's on the ball. Look at this. Let's see what's happening here. So why has he moved there? Has he moved there because he met her? Or did he meet her there? I think he moved there to be with her.
And with the ingredients that I bought at that shop, I decided we're going to make syreniki.
I hated them when I was little. I hated these cottage cheese pancakes.
Delicious. So whilst we do that, let's talk about the negatives.
Okay.
What is negative about moving to Russia? The main thing, bureaucracy. There's absolutely too much of it. So the main point about bureaucracy that is difficult is even being able to get here. Now, like every good thing, if it's easy to get, it's not good, is it? You have to work for things that are worthwhile.
I'm not gonna put you through this.
They're wondering why I came to this city, because when I originally came, there were some issues in my city, Kursk.
What were these issues in Kursk? I don't remember anything in Kursk.
She asked a few questions by the FSB, who, if you don't know, are a government agency here.
Okay. And so what are they gonna do? They're gonna cook their little syreniki. Oh, this is the most interesting member of the...
And in conclusion, I would say, if you want to move to Russia, and you love the culture, you love the language, you love the people, the history, all of that.
Well, I'm not going to continue giving you analysis because we've gone on far too long. Sorry that we were skipping a little bit too much, looking for value in the last few minutes. I'm staying in London. I've never lived in Russia. I just lived in the Soviet Union. But I can tell, especially with our audience in Scandinavia and our audience in Canada and the United States. Got a lot of people watching us from Scandinavia. Actually, we're quite Scandinavia big. I can just tell that after watching this, you are desperate to move to the Russian Federation, in particular to Kursk. I think you're all going to be lining up in airports to Turkey or wherever, so that you can fly. So you can fly to Russia and permanently resettle. Good luck with that. You won't be able to watch me from there as easily, but that's just the reality of the choice you've made. That's love.